We're starting our new sermon series. It's called Unfiltered Prayer: Snapshots from the Psalms. And the idea here is to add into our lives, if we're not already doing it, it's really to add this idea of daily scripture and daily prayer. Really strengthen that piece of our journey with Christ. Often, life and busyness and our distracted, nature and all those kind of things, sometimes they work against us having a habit of prayer or a habit of scripture and a practice of those things. So really our goal is to use scripture, use these Psalms as a way of learning about prayer, but also as a way of engaging in prayer all through Lent. Now, a couple of things that we're adding, made available for you guys as tools. Use them or don't use them, but we made them available. There's two different ways that we kind of arranged for you guys to help engage the Psalms and prayer this Lent season. On the back walls back here, there's some prayer journals back there. And so grab one on your way out if you want to utilize these. On the inside cover of the prayer journal is a list of all the things if you wanted to get through all of the Psalms in the season of Lent, you could read 3 to 4 Psalms a day. So there's kind of a reading plan. You can check off which day you've gotten to and all that kind of stuff. So for those who are really want to get through all of the Psalms in Lent, then you can do that, and there's just a reading plan to make that easy. The rest of the journal is for folks who, I don't want to go through. I don't want to have a shallow understanding of 150 Psalms. I want to have a good understanding of 6 of them. And so the journals are created so that you can actually read the same Psalm each week several times, and then write, and then just practice journaling, practice prayer journaling about something covering that Psalm covered that week. So this week we're reading Psalm 13. You could read Psalm 13 every day this week, hopefully highlighting a little bit something different every time you pull it up, and then you can write a prayer. There's just some pages there that just say, "Dear God, comma," and then you can just write a prayer, an unfiltered prayer, based on what you saw there in Psalm 13. So that's what those are for. Use them, for what they're worth. This morning I want you to hear Psalm 13. By the way, I do want to comment. I think I've been inspired this morning to create this as a church-wide emphasis. I think in solidarity with Tim and with his daughter, we should all give up watching My Little Pony during Lent. Okay, so there you go. So join me in this spiritual discipline of Lent. There you go. So Psalm 13. Let's hear these words from the psalmist. How long, O Lord? How will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look and answer, Lord God. Give light to my eyes, for I am death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him. And my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Will you pray with me? God, we thank you for your word that still speaks even today. It's not some dead book that was written thousands of years ago. It still speaks to us today. And God, I pray that it would speak this morning, that you would either use me now or move me out of the way and speak a word in spite of me. Either way, God, we all came here for your Holy Spirit to be our teacher today. And we pray these things as we pray them in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, before we go any further, let me clarify that pastors and their spouses never fight. We just have glorious conversations. That's what I like to call them. So now I remember the very first glorious conversation my wife and I ever had. And in the first, she was sitting over here on the first service and was laughing at me. But our very first glorious conversation, I've shared this a long time ago, but our very first glorious conversation, or fight, if you will, was when we had gotten married in April, and I was a traveling musician, speaker guy at the time. And so we got married in April, and then June 1st, I left for 27 days straight. And I remember on the 27th day, calling her from a hotel in Nashville or wherever it was at the time. And I remember the glorious conversation that we had. And I remember what she even said, because one of the things she said that has stuck with me. She said, if I had wanted to be single, I wouldn't have married you. I mean, I got married because I wanted to be married, and so I learned, and she won that argument, as is often the case. And then our second glorious conversation was had early on in our marriage, when I made the great decision, the decision of all decisions, to side with her ex-husband in an argument. No one ever said I was smart, people, okay? No one ever said I was smart. And so that conversation, that argument, she won that one as well. And I learned through these, as we started having these disagreements, these conversations, whatever you want to call them, I started to learn some things about who she was and how she engages in those kind of conversations, and who I am and how I engage in those kind of conversations. So the thing I learned about Ginger was, first of all, she's the most honest person you'll ever meet. Huge, integrity, measure is off the scale, right? So she's the kind of person that, what she thinks, she's going to say. If she feels it, she's going to tell it to you. She wants you to know. And her idea is, if I share this, if I get it all out there, then we can get it over with, right? Let's put whatever we're disagreeing about, let's put it on the table, and I'll say what I'm going to say, and you say what you're going to say, and then we'll just get it over with. The problem is she's married to me. And the deal is, I view that a completely different way, because as a pastor, I've told you guys this before too, that there are 3 sermons that get preached every Sunday. There's the sermon that I write, there's the sermon that actually comes out of my mouth, and then there's the sermon that you hear. And those are often 3 completely different sermons. And so it's true in our disagreements as well. There's what I thought about saying, and then there's what I actually say, and then there's what she actually hears. There's these 3 different kind of communication moments, and so I've learned enough about that, though I don't really want to say what I'm thinking in that given moment, because I feel like I'm probably going to say something dumb. That's a learning from the conversation where I sided with her ex-husband. And so I've learned to kind of, I take things in. So if you come to me with if you're critiquing me or criticizing something I've done or whatever, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to make you feel good about yourself in that moment. I'm going to go off and I'm going to think. This is what we do when she and I have a disagreement. So I'll go off and I'll listen and I'll soak it all in, and then I'll go and I'll think about it. And I'm asking myself some questions while I'm processing. I'm thinking, okay, well, what part of this is my fault? How did I add to this? What did I say that maybe maybe it came out the wrong way, maybe I didn't communicate very well, or what part of this did I play? And then I would also think, well, and what part of this is she, she just messed up, right? She's just wrong. And so I think of what's my part, and I think of what her part is, and then I think, oh, how can I communicate better? So I go off and I process. And you're going to make fun of me, you're going to mock me about this, but this is true story, and we're still married happily. I usually will go off for, say, 24 hours, sometimes 36, sometimes 48 hours. Ask her if this is true. Some of our most heated disagreements have been resolved because I go off and I process, and then I send her an email. Now, for someone who communicates for a living, you're probably thinking, dude, you should know better than that. But the truth is, I actually kind of like it, because in that there's the sermon that you write, and the sermon that you preach, and the sermon that they hear. You're actually removing the middleman, because now I can write it down, I can read it, I can reread it, I can make sure it communicates exactly what I want it to say, and then I send it, and then she doesn't. There's not this misstep of me not saying it the way that I meant to say it, and so I'll send this to her, and usually, it's worked. It's not. I don't, think that you should emulate that necessarily, but that is something that I have learned about our communication styles. I like to make sure that I get heard for what I'm really saying and not what I meant to say or not what she's hearing. And so I'll send her an email. So you can mock me all you want, but that we're still happily married. So that's what we do. Now, the truth is, I've learned something about these conversations that we have. What I've learned about all of that is that both things have wisdom. There's a beauty to the honesty, the raw, unfiltered honesty that my wife brings to our relationship. I never have to wonder where I stand with Ginger. If she's mad at me, whether she says it or not, you can see it on her face. But she'll tell me if there's something I've done that's really dumb. She'll say, "Hey, that was pretty dumb." And her idea is, let's get it out on the table, let's move on. There's a beauty to that. There's an honesty to that, and there's a rawness to it, and there's a willingness to say, hey, it's not that big of a deal. Let's just talk about it. Let's get it over with, and let's move on. I also think that there's some wisdom to the other. I think there is wisdom to sometimes go off and filter and scratch out and retype, or to rethink and to think, what part have I played and how can I say this so that she'll be able to hear it, all those kind of things. I think there's wisdom in both. And I will say this, the reason I think there's wisdom in the editing version, the filtered version, is because in human communication, it's really easy to get misunderstood. It's really easy to say something in a way that will be misunderstood, and it will hurt somebody's feelings or make them angry or disappoint them or hurt them or whatever it is in human communication. Now, the reason we're doing a sermon series called Unfiltered Prayer is because it really hinges on this basic premise. God never misunderstands you. Let me say that again. God never misunderstands you. No matter what you say to Him, He knows what you meant. No matter how the words come out in your prayer, He knows your heart. So there's no risk to being misunderstood. And certainly God is big enough. He's been critiqued and judged enough throughout history where you can feel certain you're not going to hurt His feelings. You're not going to call into question His credibility or His power or His authority or His any of those things. And if that is true, if you can agree with me that that is true, then I think it changes the way we can approach prayer. We can take off the filter. We can say to God what it is that we're really thinking at that moment. And then God can take our very real selves, and He can utilize that. Now, nowhere do we see this more powerfully represented than in the Psalms. If you've not read the Psalms, you just need to read, if you read 10 Psalms in a row, you're going to find some messed up stuff in there. Like people saying, hey, God, where are you? Why do you hate me? Please destroy my enemies. Take them out, God. Make them good and hurt, it's messed up stuff in there. And there's a part of me that reads it and says, God, why did you let that in? Like, shouldn't you have kind of filtered some of that stuff out? Maybe you should have, maybe there should only be 142 Psalms or something, Maybe God should have just taken some of those things out. But friends, they're all in there. And so as I read them, and I read some of the crazy, unfiltered, sometimes just flat out mean stuff that people write in there, I think, why did God let those in? Why are those things in the Scriptures? Because surely God doesn't want to destroy our enemies for us. Surely it's not because God says, hey, I think it's good for you to pray that God will destroy your enemies. Surely that's not the reason they're there. Friends, I think they're there because they're teaching us how to pray. I think they're there to teach us that we can say anything, that there is nothing at risk in us saying what we already think. This is God. He knows what we're going to say before we even say it. He knows what we're feeling, so there's no sense hiding it. We can remove the filter, take it out of the equation, and then be who we are in front of God. And then, and often only then, can God take who we are and begin to form us. Let's look in Psalm 13 this morning. Let's see some of this unfiltered prayer in action. What would it look like if you and I were to use the Psalms as kind of an example of how we can have an unfiltered prayer life? So look in Psalm 13 again. We're just going to kind of pull it apart into three different parts. Verses 1 and 2, listen again. How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Friends, just in those first two verses, we hear 4 or 5 different times the psalmist say, how long? And so here's the first thing I want to lift up to us. If we're looking at the Psalms as a template for prayer, as permission that God gives us to really say what we're thinking or what we're feeling, if we're looking at it in that way, I want to lift up the first thing. When God seems to be hiding, it's okay to ask how long. When God seems to be hiding, it's okay to ask how long. Do you ever feel, you know what I'm talking about? When you hear this, the psalmist here, he feels like God's hiding from him. He feels like God is taking a nap somewhere, playing hard to get. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt like, man, I try to pray, I'm trying to say all the right stuff, I'm trying to do all this right stuff, but it feels like my prayers are bouncing off the ceiling and they're never getting off the ground. They're never getting out of this room. I say something and I pray, but it feels like God's not even there. Well, friends, if you felt that way, then you know exactly what this psalmist is saying. He feels like God is playing hide and seek with him. When my kids were little, and I was a little bit younger as a dad, my kids and we would wrestle and all that kind of stuff. And the deal was we'd wrestle for a while, and then all of a sudden, one of us would get up and we'd start playing chase around the house. And so in the house that we're in now, if you do that, you kind of run around through the living room, the dining room, the kitchen. They're all connected, and you're running around the stairs and this kind of stuff in a circle. And so what I like to do is if they were chasing me, I'd run and I'd run. I'd get just far enough ahead of them, and then I'd duck into the laundry room. And I'd just get real quiet. And then they'd come running around. They'd run on around, and I could hear them. And then I'd wait to see what would happen, and they'd walk around on the other side, and they'd come back, and they'd say, "Dad? Where are you, Dad? Where'd you go, Dad?" And then they'd think, oh, he's hiding from us, so they'd start sneaking around like I couldn't hear him. I didn't know where they were. And I'd be sitting in the laundry room just waiting. Oh, please let him walk right past me, please. And they'd walk right past me, and I'd be back behind the door. And as soon as they get past, I'd get right behind them. I'd go, ah! And there were a few occasions where some bladder control was at issue, was at stake there. And I mean, it was, and then sometimes they'd scream, they would cry. They would say that they'd never cried, but sometimes they did. And so I would just scream right behind them. Now, friends, I think sometimes, not the screaming part, but the hiding part, I think sometimes we think God has left us. We think God has wandered off. We think, again, that our prayers don't ever really exit the building. They just kind of bounce off the ceiling. We think God has left us. We think He doesn't love us anymore. We think He's not active. We think He's not doing anything. And we think that because we look at our situation and we see that these things keep happening. God, how long is my anxiety going to have control over me? How long will my depression still have the loudest voice in my life? God, how long will my marital problems continue? God, how long? How long? How long? And we see our circumstances, and that's all we see. And so it feels like God's wandered off. Now, the good news I have for you is that God never wanders off. If He feels far away from you, it's not because He's moved. God's still there. But I think if we look at this Psalm 13, it gives us permission. I think it gives us permission to say, God, how long? How long is this going to happen? How long is this going to go on? God, it feels like you're not even listening to me. I don't think we have to filter that out. I think we can ask those questions. That's what the psalmist does. That psalm is in this book, right? It's in the scriptures. So when it seems like God is hiding, I think it's okay for us to ask, how long? After all, isn't how long a question of faith anyway? I mean, when you think about the question, how long, isn't that a question of faith? If you're stuck in traffic on Southwest Freeway and you're coming home, it's a Friday afternoon, and it's raining outside, and you're going a half mile an hour, it's the worst traffic you've ever seen on some holiday weekend, everybody trying to get out of town, and here you come, you're going your half mile an hour. Eventually, you get frustrated. And eventually, you start thinking, man, am I ever going to get, like, how long is this going to last, right? How long is it going to take for me to actually get from here to my house? And you start asking that question of how long. Friends, that's not a question of doubt. I mean, when you ask that question, you already know the answer. You're not thinking, am I ever going to get home? It's not a question of if you're going to get home. It's a question of when you're going to get home. How long is a question of faith? Because you know that it's going to happen. You're just impatient. You're saying, God, how long is that going to take? Friends, I think this is a faithful question. How long, God? I know you're God. I know you're there. Doesn't seem like you're there. It seems like you're hiding from me. How long? I know we're going to get there. But how long? When it seems like God's hiding, it's okay to ask how long. Second thing, when life gets hard, there's no shame in crying for help. Right? There's no shame in crying out for help. Look at these next two verses. Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemies will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. See, this is a moment when the psalmist is at the end of his rope. He's like, God, if you don't help me, I'm going to die. Have you ever felt like that, right? God, I've been asking. It seems like you're hiding from me, and if you don't help, God, this is it. I'm going to have to give up. I'm going to implode. I'm going to explode. Something's bad's going to happen, and it's going to end badly. This psalmist is at the end of their rope. Life feels like it's too hard, and so they are crying out for help. And Parkway, I don't care how you were raised. I don't care what our American Western culture tells you. There is no shame in crying out for help, especially to God. We are taught to cry out for help to God from God. God, please, if you don't help me, I'm going to sleep in death, right? If you don't help me, this is going to go badly. I won't be able to make it, God, if you don't help me. I actually had a parishioner from another church, a congregation member at another church, and he was a good guy. They came to church, very faithful, being at church, all that kind of stuff. Honestly, believe he loved God. But one of the things, so he would come to me every once in a while, and we'd talk about stuff, and he would say, "Hey, let me tell you about this issue that's going on in my life." And so he'd talk about whatever the circumstance was at the time. And then I would say at the end, I'd say, "Hey, is it okay if I will be in prayer for you for that? I'll be in prayer for you about that thing." And you know what he would do? He'd stop me. He said, "No, that's okay. I don't need you to pray for me." Now I got to tell you, that was a first in the history of my pastoral ministry. Nobody ever asked the pastor not to pray for them, right? Now, so I'd be sitting there, I'd be offering to pray. And he said, "No, please don't pray. It's okay." And I was confused, so I asked him one time. I said, "Why don't you? Do you not? You hate my stinking guts? Like, what is it about me that you don't? Do you think my prayers are counterproductive? Am I going to curse you by praying? Like, what's going on?" And he said, "No, actually, I don't like to bring stuff like this to God because I'm afraid that when I really need Him, He's not going to answer." Now, friends, I'm just going to go ahead and confess, I'm a broken man. I'm a sinful pastor. In that moment, I'm not supposed to be silently judging, but in that moment, I was like, dude, that's messed up. Because I was thinking to myself, so it's almost as if he believes that God is a genie in a bottle that we just kind of rub the lamp and out comes the genie and he gives us our 3 wishes, but you got to be careful because after you run out of those 3 wishes, God's not going to give you anything else that you want. It was as if God owed him some favors and if he called in too many of the favors, he would run out of favors and then all of a sudden, God wasn't going to listen to his prayers anymore. And at the time I thought, dude, that's pretty messed up. And then you know what happened? I started noticing not only in my own prayer life, but in the prayer life of people that I met in different places at different times, we may not be as honest as he is, but I think we pray like he does often. We feel like maybe we shouldn't cry out to God for the help. God, I feel almost guilty. You got so much going on. There's like 7 billion people, and if they're all praying, they want a parking spot over here, and they want the roses in their backyard to bloom. It's just too much stuff. So God, I'm going to wait till I really need it. God, I'm gonna pull all the weight myself, and then when I get to the very end of my rope, then I might, maybe on a good day, if I think I've got enough wishes left, God, I'm going to say, hey, can you help me with this one little thing? Just need a little help here. Friends, that's messed up. But I saw it in my own prayer life, and I saw it in the people that I was pastoring as well. He was just more honest about it than the rest of us are. Friends, this psalm reminds us it is okay. There is no shame in us crying out for help. God is not a genie. You do not only have 3 wishes. He is completely capable. If he is God at all, he is completely capable of dealing with the prayers and desires, the big, the little, and the medium-sized things of 7 billion plus people. He is not going to run out of hard drive capacity or RAM. He's not. He's God. So it's okay. There's no shame in us asking God for help. And that's the second thing I think we see here. This person is not only saying, how long? God, how long is it? But God, and let me, by the way, say, God, I need your help. Friends, if we want to have that unfiltered, intimate prayer life with God, it's okay to ask how long. And it's not only okay, but important, I think, for us to say, God, help. Last thing. When life gets hard, don't forget to say, I trust you. Don't forget, in the midst of all of the stuff that happens, don't forget to say, I trust you. Listen to what the psalmist says here next at the very end. He says, but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Now I don't know about you, but that's not where I thought this psalm was going. This guy's going, how long? God, please help me. I'm thinking he's going to end on some, really big, he's going to toss a grenade into the mix and it's going to be, no, what he does is he sticks the dismount. He gets to the very end of his prayer and he does a double backflip with a double twist and he sticks the dismount because he's okay. It's okay to say, God, how long? It's okay to say, God, I need your help, please. There's no shame in that. But at the end, he doesn't forget to say, I trust you. God, I know it feels too long. It feels like I'm going to die. But I'm going to trust you. I do rejoice in your salvation. I will sing your praises, for you have been good to me. He remembers at the very end. He comes back and he says, God, I trust you. There's been a couple of times in my own ministry where they're kind of connected, where this has happened to me. One of them is when I was first starting in ministry. It was before Ginger and I got married. I was associate pastor at Faith Methodist, and basically was struggling with the call to do this traveling ministry of music and speaking. And I was saying, God, do you want me to write these songs and record them and perform them and do speaking across the country, or do you want me to serve in a church? And I was nervous because I was leaving the security of a salary, which matters, and of people that I really liked. And I was doing student ministries at the time. I loved the students I was working with and their parents. It was a great situation, and I was really struggling. And I had a friend, her name was Stacy, and she was a pastor, and she was in my little covenant small group. And as I was sharing this with her, she said, "Hey, Matt, you know exactly what God has, what He wants you to do. You're just afraid to do it." And she was right. I was afraid. I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of going out there and recording these CDs, and nobody would buy them, and then I'd have to come back into the church with my tail between my legs and say, "Hey, Bishop, please appoint me to a church because I'm starving." And I was afraid that I'd be kind of damaged goods. Well, I had to go home that night on my way back home, and I said, God, I think she's right. And I don't know if what the world thinks of as failure is failure to you, but I'm going to trust you with both my success and my failure. If this goes poorly, I'll know that somehow it was still you that called me to it. And if this goes really well, I'll know it was still you that called me to it. And so I decided to step over that line and to go into that ministry. Now, fast forward 10 or 15 years, and we were called to start a church down in League City called the Watershed, another Methodist church. And so we went down there to do that. And the church, it launched well, and we were doing pretty well. We had a hurricane which threw a kink in the thing, and just kind of got to where it was stagnant. And then all of a sudden we got news that we were going to be kicked out of the school that we were meeting in, much like this church got kicked out of the club at one time. And so I'm thinking, we're not big enough to buy and to build, to buy land and to build stuff. And we've kind of stagnated, like we're not getting any bigger. We grew to about 150 in worship, and we weren't getting any bigger than that. We weren't getting any smaller, and we weren't getting any bigger. And I just remember thinking, God, I felt like the people of Israel out in the desert saying, "Hey, God, did you call me out here to die? Maybe I should go back to Egypt, because maybe Egypt was a little better than wandering out here in the wilderness. I mean, I thought this was your idea. Like, I thought this whole new church thing, I thought this was your idea. And so are you going to really is this thing going to implode on itself, and people are just going to start kind of quit coming, and it's going to shrink and shrink and shrink until finally it's just going to go away, and I'm going to look the fool? Did you call me out here so that I could just look foolish?" I'm walking around my house, talking to myself, having this conversation with God. If my neighbors had seen, or if my wife had walked in, I would have immediately shut up and just pretend like I didn't know what was going on. "Who are you? I don't know what you're doing," But I'm having this really honest conversation with God, and there was this moment where God kind of, he didn't physically tap me on the shoulder, but spiritually he kind of tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Hey, Matt, do you remember that conversation we had like 10 years ago? Where you said you trusted me with your success and failure, and that you understood that success in the world's eyes is not necessarily the same thing as success in mine? You remember when you said you were going to trust me with both your success and your failure? Did you mean that? And do you still?" Friends, it's okay for us to say, "God, how long?" It's okay for us to say, "God, I need help." And to be really honest, unfiltered, to have this intimate life with God, because you can never be misunderstood. But don't forget to come back and say, "God, it doesn't feel like we're ever going to get there. And it feels like I might just die right now. But no matter what happens, God, I trust you. I will sing your praises because you have been good to me." Don't forget to come back and say to God, "God, how long? I need your help." But don't forget to come back and say, "I trust you."